Ben Shapiro goes nuclear on woke culture, and they are furious. You guys are not going to want to miss this.
A lot of members of the left starting to realize that wokeness is destroying America, which is why of late you've seen some conversations about how you're not supposed to use the term wokeness, which is weird since they made it up. And so I'm fine with using the term wokeness. I intend on continuing to use that word. It is their fault that it became a poisonous word, not mine. It's because the idea is incredibly stupid.
Alright, so here's the deal. Wokeness is everywhere. You can't scroll through Twitter, watch a Netflix show, or even buy a cup of coffee without someone bringing it up. And you know who's not afraid to call it out? Ben Shapiro. Love him or hate him, Ben's been on a mission to tear down woke culture brick by brick, and man, does he go in hard. Let's talk about the term woke for a second. Weirdly enough, the same people who came up with it are now saying we shouldn't use it. Like, really? Ben's not having that. He's sticking with it. Because hey, they made it a thing. He didn't. And why should he stop using it just because it's now become toxic? That's on them, right? Ben argues that wokeness is straight up wrecking America, and to be honest, a lot of folks seem to agree with him. Why is Ben so fired up about wokeness? Well, for starters, he says it's built on a foundation of lies. And not just one or two lies, he's talking about four big ones. First, wokeness spreads lies about America itself. Then it twists the narrative around inequality. It messes with ideas of personal responsibility. And lastly, this is the kicker, it even warps our understanding of truth itself. That's a lot of lying going on, and Ben's not shy about calling it out.
So, the problem with wokeness is that, bottom line, it promulgates lies. In particular, it promulgates four sets of lies. It promulgates lies about the nature of the United States. It promulgates lies about the nature of inequality. It promulgates lies about the nature of responsibility. And finally, it promulgates lies about the nature of truth itself.
But here's where it gets juicy. According to Ben, wokeness isn't just a bad idea, it's practically a religion. And if you think about it, that analogy kind of fits, right? He says it has all the hallmarks of a cult, complete with its own unbreakable code of conduct. Except here's the catch. The code is constantly shifting. One day you're woke enough, and the next you've violated some new unspoken rule. You don't even know what the standard is anymore because it keeps changing. It's like a game where the rules get rewritten every time you think you figured it out.
It's got a nearly impenetrable code. The code is constantly changing. It is constantly moving. You have no idea what the standard is from day to day. But that code is brought to you by a priestly caste of really intelligent and woke people who will be able to absolve you of sin so long as you listen to everything they say. There is an intermediary.
Ben paints a picture of this woke priesthood, the intellectual elite who control the narrative and decide who gets forgiven for their sins, as long as they're towing the line. Honestly, it's a clever metaphor, and Ben makes the case that this constant shifting of rules is not only confusing, but dangerous. It's impossible to follow something that's always changing, right? That's how you end up with chaos. And Ben doesn't stop there. He takes a jab at the woke crowd by comparing their belief system to a cult, not just because of its rigid beliefs, but because of how they enforce those beliefs. Think about it. If you agree with wokeness, you're absolved of all wrongs. It's like, as long as you believe, you can do no wrong. But if you step out of line, if you dare to challenge the dogma, you'll face consequences.
It's got sacrificial rights, right? People who are bad, who do not mouth the proper catechism, are immediately destroyed, and there's no forgiveness.
There really is a double standard in America, whether you are for the woke nonsense or you are not. And if you're for it, nobody will attack you because nobody wants the label of being transphobic. For instance, there was a scenario in a high school where there was a transgender man who was like 20 years old. In high school, he was an illegal immigrant. He went in and assaulted many different females in the bathroom, and this happened on 3 or 4 different occasions. And the school absolutely let it go. They just brushed it under the rug and hope people forgot about it. Meanwhile, if this was a man that committed those acts, after the first time, he would be thrown away, which is the right thing to do. But in the crazy world we're living in today, if he had just identified as a female and called himself transgender, I am almost positive his case would have been drastically different, because the law should be applied blindly to everyone equally. And not only that, if you speak up against this, then you are public enemy number one. You are their mortal enemy, and they will do whatever it takes to try and destroy you.
It sounds pretty intense, right? Almost like the plot of a dystopian novel where people live in fear of breaking unwritten rules. Ben argues that there are actually rules in this woke world. They're just made up by the people in charge, and if you don't follow them, you're gonna pay. And get this, major brands are falling right in line with it. Ford, for example, rolled out a rainbow Ford F-150 for Pride Month.
So Ford has decided for Pride Month, they're going to release a rainbow Ford F-150. Again, rainbow wheel rolling over a human face forever. And Ford's F-150 brand is supposed to be the manly men who are like picking up lumber in the back of their truck.
Yes, a rainbow truck. Now, don't get me wrong, it's great that brands want to support causes, but Ben's point is that these brands are hopping on the woke bandwagon just to stay relevant. Are they truly woke, or is this just about looking good for the cameras? But here's where things get really interesting. Ben goes further to call out who he sees as the true gatekeepers of wokeness. And it's not just activists on Twitter. Nope. According to Ben, the intermediaries are the media. The New York Times editorial board, angry Twitter mobs, and late-night TV hosts, they're the ones pushing the woke agenda. And even these so-called gatekeepers rely on their own woke intermediaries to interpret certain issues for them. Ben suggests it's gotten so ridiculous that these media figures have to call up their black friends to explain blackness to them, just so they can keep up the facade and dodge accusations of white privilege.
An intermediary between you and wokeness. The intermediary is fairly obvious, right? It is all the members of the New York Times editorial board. It is all the people who tweet angrily on Twitter. It is your late night host, but even they have intermediaries. They have to call in some of their black friends, as we saw on all of the late night TV shows last night, in order to interpret blackness for them so that they can absolve themselves of their own white privilege.
Ben's on fire at this point. He goes on to say that woke culture is ruthless, and he's talking about cancel culture here, obviously. Once you're labeled as problematic, there's no coming back. It doesn't matter if you made a mistake decades ago or if it was just a misunderstanding. If you cross the line, the woke mob will cancel you. No second chances. Ben's argument is that this lack of forgiveness is exactly what makes wokeness so dangerous. There's no room for nuance or growth. It's just black and white. So how do you survive in this woke world? According to Ben, it's simple. You listen and you repeat. Just follow the script and you'll be fine. But if you try to think for yourself, well, good luck.
Religion of wokeness suggests a bunch of conflicting things, and the only way to avoid the conflict is to just listen and repeat. Listen and believe. Right? That's the basic idea here.
It's almost like he's saying woke people are mindless zombies, just regurgitating whatever they're told. It's harsh, but that's his take. And then, of course, Ben dives into one of the most heated issues in the woke debate, the difference between sex and gender. Woke culture insists that sex and gender are completely separate things. Ben, however, isn't buying it. He believes that gender is tied to biology, and if you try to separate the two, it just doesn't make sense.
Sex and gender are two different concepts, but gender is tied to biology. So one of the big problems that you see in sort of the argument in favor of trans rights is this notion that gender and sex are completely separable. They're not completely separable. If they are completely separable, then this means that identifying people by their subjective gender really has no relevance as to whether they are a male or a female.
When I was in elementary school, sex and gender were interchangeable. It's only in the last couple of years when people are telling me it's different. If you want to know who rules over you, find out who you can't insult. Try insulting or joking around about somebody that's gay, somebody that's transgender, and somebody that's non-binary. You almost have to fear for your life. It's not enough that these people believe their delusions themselves. They try and push it and force it down your throat, and if you do not accept it, and they will do whatever it takes, it seems like, to silence you.
Passionate argument, and Ben makes it clear he's not here for the woke logic. He even brings up his buddy Matt Walsh's famous question, what is a woman? It's a simple question, right? But when Ben posed it to a trans activist, the response was silence.
Here's my question. It's an argument that my friend Matt Walsh likes to make. What is a woman? Define what a woman is without reference to the word woman, please.
The activist tried to dodge the question by accusing Ben of using a logical fallacy, but let's be real, it was a pretty clear deflection. That's a typical tactic according to Ben. When confronted with tough questions, woke people tend to pivot or throw the blame back on the person asking the question. But Ben wasn't done yet. He took on the medical consensus around trans issues, arguing that politically driven doctors are pushing a false narrative. If a doctor denies the biological difference between males and females, Ben says, they're not practicing real science. They're letting their politics cloud their judgment.
Then you actually just disagree with medical consensus within the Western nation.
Yes, I disagree with the false medical consensus driven by politically driven, quote-unquote, doctors. If any doctor denies to me that there is a dichotomy between male and female, female, a sexual dichotomy between male and female. They're ignorant, and they are letting their politics get in the way of their science.
Bold, right? He's not just going after activists anymore. He's calling out the entire medical establishment for bending to woke ideology. And here's where Ben really drops the mic. Anybody who suggests to you that there is such a thing as a pregnant male is not a doctor, they're an activist.
Who suggests to you that there is such a thing, for example, as a pregnant male is not a doctor, they are an activist.
Oof, that's the kind of statement that makes you sit back for a second and think. Whether you agree or not, Ben's not pulling any punches here. But let's not forget the most ironic part of woke culture that Ben points out, the idea that both speech and silence are violence. Yes, you heard that right. If you speak and someone doesn't like it, you've committed violence. If you stay silent, well, that's violence too. It's a classic no-win situation, and Ben's take, it's ridiculous. How are we supposed to communicate if everything we do is deemed offensive or violent?
We've heard that speech is violence. So if I say something you don't like, I've enacted violence upon you. I used to hear this when I would speak at college campuses. People were literally chanting speech is violence when I spoke at UC Berkeley. Also, silence is violence. So if you don't speak, that's a form of violence. So if you do speak and we don't like it, that's violence. If you don't speak, that is also a form of violence.
He even jokingly suggests that America's new form of communication might have to be miming or tap dancing, since apparently talking and staying quiet are both out of the question.
So America has now adopted tap dancing, apparently, as its new solution, or mimery. I mean, that because if you speak, it's violence. If you don't speak, it's violence. So we have to find some other form of communication.
Funny, sure, but he's making a serious point. Wokeness, in his eyes, is becoming a virus, one that infects everything it touches, and he's not the only one who feels that way. In the end, Ben argues that wokeness is filling a God-shaped hole in people's hearts. For those who've abandoned traditional religion, wokeness becomes a substitute. It's a way to signal virtue and separate the believers from the non-believers.
The religious nature of wokeness is incredible. It is a substitute for religion. People are filling a God-shaped hole in their hearts with performative virtue signaling. And what the virtue signaling is really designed to do in the end is to separate you off from the non-believer.
Bob Dylan says it himself. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. If you don't want to believe in God, that's your right. You can believe whatever you want. But don't for a second believe that you are not serving anybody. Because by pushing this transgenderism and gay stuff to the youth, you are doing them a massive disservice, because I believe you are putting them on a path towards the devil. It doesn't really matter where you are in the world. This stuff will reach your door. This will affect your life in some way. Whether you're in school, whether you're at work, whether you're at the movies, whether you're sitting at home watching TV, this stuff is constantly being pushed into your brain, whether you know it or not. The subtle little things that they do in commercials, TV shows. Like, when was the last time you turned on the TV and there was a smart dad? Does that even happen anymore? I can't think of any show in the last 20 years where the dad was intelligent, knew what he was doing, had his house in order. That's just a fallacy nowadays. In fact, one of my favorite TV shows, Malcolm in the Middle, announced a reboot. I was over the moon till I found out they're making one of the old characters non-binary. Is there nothing that is just straight entertainment anymore? Why must you constantly push an agenda? Can't anything just be for fun? It really infuriates me because I notice it every single time. I can hear or see the propaganda almost immediately. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this down below. Was there ever a show or movie that you loved until they pushed an agenda on you and then you're completely out of it? Another one for me is Designated Survivor. That one got horrible towards the end. But yeah, let me know if there's any in your life. I'd love to hear that. And if you enjoyed, make sure to smash that, like, comment, subscribe, and wish you guys nothing but the best. Till next time.